Okay, you're watching Co-op for Two, broadcasting live from Champaign, Illinois on March 20th, 2022 at 5:30 a.m. And you're watching the first Co-op for Two live coffee brewing, espresso making. Let me know in the chat if you can hear me and see me. This is not public. So only Zachary Brown should be here, and maybe Rebecca. There seems to be a big delay now. I'm not sure exactly why, so I'll just talk about what we're going to do here. I've brought my espresso machine and my grinder, my coffee beans, my scale, my portafilter, knockbox, tamper, and we are going to make a Brevicano. This is my name for espresso with half and half. Apparently there's a name for a drink called Breve, B-R-E-V-E, that people have started calling any espresso drink with half and half. That's how I like to make it. And I'm going to give you a tour of everything here, and then we're going to make it live. So you see we have the espresso machine. This is a Breville Bambino, not Bambino Plus, but regular Bambino, which I think is better because it's smaller. It doesn't have automatic milk steaming. You have to manually do it, but it's smaller and it can dispense hot water, which is important if you like Americano, etc. Okay, so that's our espresso machine. And I've got a couple baskets mounted on the side with magnets, and you'll see what this is in a minute. And you'll see what this is in a minute. You can't see that. Okay. These are the beans we're making today. This is Papua New Guinea from Mad Goat, and these were roasted on March 10th, so they're properly of age. We've got a Black Mirror scale from Time More, and I can turn it on and give you a look at that. There's the scale, which I will show you how we'll be using. We've got our grinder here, which is a Breville Smart Grinder Pro with a 3D printed single dose hopper here, replacing the original big basket. And I've got my half and half. So I'm doing it from behind everything, but I think it should work fine. So the first thing we do is we measure out our coffee beans. Now, the professional espresso people will tell you not to brew single cups, but I like brewing single cups because I like making more frequently making the espresso, so smaller dosages. So I've tared out the measurement to 0, and now we're going to measure 11 grams of beans here, which is what fills up my single dose hopper perfectly. Okay, so there's my 11 grams of coffee beans. You can see. All right, and now we put that in here in the grinder. Now, each bean has to be dialed in based on the kind of bean, the roast, and possibly even the age of it. The Papua New Guinea beans, I know, should be dialed in to a grain size of 7. So we're just going to turn this on, and we're going to adjust this down to 7. That'll give it the right size of the grains. And when you make espresso, if you go down to the rabbit hole of making espresso, the most important thing is getting the grind size correct so that your espresso water comes through at the right speed. If it goes through too fast, it's under extracted. It doesn't have enough time to get out the solubles in the coffee you want. If it's ground, that happens if it's ground too coarsely. If it's ground too finely, it'll take too long for the water to come through the puck, and water will get stuck in the puck, which will give you less liquid in the end, but it will be over extracted. The water will spend too much time in the beans and you'll get too much bitterness and taste you don't want. Okay, so we've put it in and now we're going to grind. Okay. So we've ground our 11 grams approximately. We're going to weigh it again to make sure. And sure enough, we do have 11 grams exactly. So that's good. That's our ground coffee. It's nice to weigh it afterwards because occasionally you'll get a bean that doesn't go through the hopper. It happens more with oily beans. Okay, so here's our portafilter. It's got a single cup size in there. These come in double or singles. The singles can hold anywhere from 8 to 12 grams or so. The doubles can hold 18 to 20. You can see this is a little hard to take it out here. This is a single wall. It's not a pressurized basket, meaning there's nothing to slow down the flow of water through it. Some of the baskets here, you can see this is a double-sized double wall, and this is a single cup double wall. Both those are pressurized. That slows down the coffee and it makes it less sensitive to the grind size, a little more forgiving, but the pros say that it reduces the taste you get out of it. Zach Brown is in the chat. He says, what's your take on espresso versus filtered coffee? Espresso versus drip coffee is what they'll call it. I do have very strong opinions about all this, and I think it's all a mental game. Like, it's all self-delusion. So the real espresso experts like James Hoffman or whatever, he can taste the difference whether you swirl the spoon clockwise or counterclockwise. He can claim to taste the difference in how the espresso tastes. But espresso is too strong for me. I don't drink it straight anyway. I add milk, which basically deadens all the flavors. So I can't claim to taste much of a difference. The way I see it, it's like making furniture. The more work and little tweaking you put into this process, the more mentally it feels like you're getting something special. So the espresso is more work, more delicate, harder to get right. And because of all that, I get more out of it. But I don't claim that that's a real thing. So I like the espresso because it's more work and more intricate. I don't claim that it tastes any better than filtered coffee or French press, etc. Okay, we've got our 11 grams. We've got our portafilter, which is what this is called. We've got our basket. Now we want to put the coffee in here. We're going to use another 3D printed device. This is a little funnel that goes on top and it just clicks in. It's got magnets. I modified the 3D design to put magnets so I can attach it to the espresso machine. And we're going to go to the top-down view here. We're just going to dip it into here. Now, when you fill it in, you can see it's a little clumpy, and the espresso pros will tell you that it's important to declump it. So what we've got here is another 3D printed part. This is called a WDT tool. Hopefully you can see the little prongs on here. Zachary Brown says, what's the 3D printed piece made from? All right, well, this is standard PLA. Everything here is PLA. PLA is not the best for health. I mean, in other words, if you were super concerned, you could use ABS, I think, which is less reactive and considered better for your health. Because we're not putting any of these in contact with heat or even liquid, I consider them quite safe, but you might print them in PLA if you cared. Okay, so back to this. This design here, this little single dose, is an incredible piece of engineering. It's actually made of like 4 different parts. It rotates. It's got little pins. It's super clever. This is fairly simple. This WDT tool, which is going to use to sort of rake this up, I'm going to show you, is a very clever 2-piece device. Prints in 2 pieces, and it uses printer cleaning head needles, which are pushed through here, out here, and you could use acupuncture needles, and it just gives it a very thin needles rake. And what you do is, let's go back to here, you basically stir up the coffee, the ground espresso, to break up any clumps. And if you go into the espresso world, you will see that that's one of the theories of what makes better espresso is you want that to be very uniformly spread out. You don't want clumps, and you don't want like pockets where water will channel through. They call that channeling. So this is, someone invented this, Weiss, so they call this a Weiss distribution tool, WDT. Of all the tools, it's the more enjoyable to use, so that's why I consider it a must-have. And it's mounted on a little magnet. I can bring it over here so you can see it. And this little magnet print is also 3D printed. Of all the little tools and tricks, I do think that one makes some logical sense, that you want it evenly distributed and get rid of the clumps. The grinder here is about $150. The espresso machine's about $250. You can get grinders that cost thousands of dollars, and you'll hear people talk about, like, everything we're seeing here is based on this guy Hoon's channel, and he does 2 live streams a day of him making coffee, and he's kind of like he's not an expert in espresso, but he's got $1 million worth of equipment, all different kinds. It's a ridiculous, bizarre channel, but it's like addictive, so I'm watching it anyway, and I'm just doing what he's doing just for fun. But he'll talk about like how the different burrs of the $3,000 machine, like you can get different burrs, and he's like, this burr tastes sweeter. This is the burr that grinds. And it is true that as you go for more expensive grinders, you get more uniform grinds, which is important. But it's insane to think that like he can taste the difference between a $2,000 and a $3,000 grinder, or the difference between a $3,000 grinder's MP burrs, multi-purpose burrs, or espresso burrs. It's totally ridiculous. But since I am focused on the mental illusion of creating complexity, I like all the digital controls here for this, so that's what makes me like this one. All right, let's go back to our espresso here. So we've ground up the espresso, we've put it in, we've fluffed it up and evened it out with our WDT tool. Now we're going to tap it a bit to settle the grounds, which now lets us take this safely off. We can put this, I see that's in the way, so we just put this here. All right, so now we've got our portafilter filled with grounds that are almost up to the top. Now I happen to know that this single basket, 11 grams, is the perfect size for this. Now we have to tamp it down a bit to compress it so that the water flows through it at a reasonable rate. The science on this suggests that it doesn't matter. You don't have to tamp it super hard. So there are lots of studies about this stuff. Coffee's a big business. So I've got 2 little tools here that I use with the coffee. The first one you can see is got these ridges, and the idea of this is this fits on top, and this would level off the coffee. So you spin it around, and you can see from looking at it why that might work, right? You can see that it's got these little ridges, and so as you twist it over, it would level things off, and you can see indeed when you look at it, it's super level now, but not tamped and compacted yet. That's what this is for. Or you can use this other side of this tool, which is flat and is about 1/4 of an inch here, and you can adjust the depths of these. Now, for me, for this basket and this machine, I figured out that this is a good height and a good amount of grams that if I tamp down with this, which you'll see. So you should see that it's got a little bit of a gap for me to tamp down, and now I'm going to push it down level. Normally I'd be standing up at the kitchen counter, so I wouldn't be twisting it. Okay, but you could use that, and which is compressed it. And I happen to know that with 11 grams, this tamps it to a good depth. Or you could use a traditional tamper and push it down like that. Okay, so now we're tamped out. We've got a nice compacted puck here. Zachary says, these look like camera lenses with zoom capabilities. Oh, these things you mean? Mm-hmm. Okay, so now we've got our portafilter with our coffee. Now we're going to attach the portafilter. I'm going to see if I can do this from behind it with my left hand. It's not going to be easy. Okay, so we're putting it here like this. Okay, so now we've twisted it until it's tight. Now, if you were... Actually, okay, I was going to make fun of something else, but it's not 100% making fun of. Generally, you'll see if you wanted to make, like, if I'm feeling like today I want to make the super special espresso, you would put the portafilter in empty, put your cup under the espresso machine, run a blank shot through, and basically the idea is you're heating up the metal of the portafilter and heating up the cup, then pour that out, then fill up your coffee and pour it through. The hotter the cup is and the metal of the portafilter just keeps the coffee hot before it gets down. You have to remember the heat is going to disperse through everything metal. So when I pour it now, some of the heat's going to be absorbed by the metal in the portafilter. And so by the time it gets into my cup and the cup is cold, it's going to cool down the coffee a little. That's fine with me because I think the coffee tastes a little better, cooler. Okay, so we're going to turn this on now. I can't really see it, but I can see it enough. Okay, so it's turned on. It's got two buttons here for a single shot and a double shot. Remember, I'm making a single shot, which the experts say no one should do. And there's some reason behind that, because the single shot with less espresso in it has got a different design, a bit like a beveled funnel. So you don't get as even penetration of the water through it. But I like making the smallest cups I can, just like going to a fancy restaurant. When you get the small plate, it makes it feel more special, etc. And I should have gotten you the clear glass. In fact, I am going to get the clear glass. So I'm just going to go down to the table while I get the clear glass so you can see it better. I'll be back in 60 seconds. Okay, I'm back. I've got a clear glass. Now, I find that the glass you drink out of makes a huge difference in terms of enjoyability. So this cup is actually my favorite recently to drink over because it's got this sort of rounded over edge. It's sort of a turned over edge, very wide and matte. And for me, that makes the best experience for drinking. But we're going to use this double wall glass so that you can see better what's going to come out. Okay, so we're going to pour our single shot. Now, first we're going to put it here because we want to measure when we come out. All right, so this is how you make your coffee when you're doing it, when you make your espresso the proper way. So we've put our glass on the scale and we've set the tare to 0. So now what we're going to do is when we pour our cup, we're going to measure how much we get out. Now, you'll watch people do it sometimes. They'll put the scale right on the coffee machine, right under it like this. And we could do that. In fact, I guess maybe we will. The idea is you want to know how much water you get out, and you're aiming for a certain ratio in a certain amount of time. That will tell you that you've got the grind setting right. So ideally, you'll be timing your shot and weighing it. Now, normally when I make it, I won't have the scale under it. I'll just make it, and whatever it is, then I'll measure it to see how well it turned out. I'm looking for somewhere in the range of 20 to 24, about 1 to 2. So 10 grams in and 20 grams of liquid out. That's about what I'm looking for in about maybe 25 seconds, 30 seconds, depending on when you start measuring. But we'll do it here so you can see it while it goes, although you probably can't see the timer. Oh, you can see it a little bit. All right, so one last thing. You could manually control how long water is pushed through the puck. So you could fix it. The machine itself is going to try to send through a certain amount, a certain volume of water for a single shot and a double shot. I like to just let it do it for its amount of time, and then when you get your result, you might adjust your grinding to fix that. But if you were really concerned with getting a perfect shot, you might do it manually, hold it down until you wanted to finish. Zachary says in the question in the chat, I like that elevated wooden table. Yeah, it's my cutting board from the kitchen. What was the cardboard box used for? This, if you're talking about this thing here, this is the protective cover I made to cover the game mat that's under this table. Okay, so we're zeroed out on the scale. Let me just make sure that's not impeded. All right, and now we're going to pour our thing, and I'm going to start the timer once we do. So I'm going to start it going. It's going to do a little pre-infusion where it puts in a little water and then waits for the water to sort of infuse into the puck, and then it'll start its thing. When you start the timer is up to you. There's some debate. So we're going to start it going. Now I'm going to start the timer. All right, so that is a tiny little shot. That suggests maybe the grind size was too small. But there's water still in the puck that's going to take some time to drip through. So if I get a small dose like this, this is only 16 grams out. And remember, I was aiming for something like 20, 22. So I'll let it drip for a little bit longer. But this is not ideal. Ideally, you'd want it to hit your destination amount fairly quickly. And I'll give you a little more technical background while we're waiting for espresso machines. There's something called a three-way solenoid valve that's in some of the espresso machines. This one is sort of their lower end model, doesn't have it. And as I understand it, the way it works is a three-way solenoid opens up to push water through, then closes when it's done. That would be two-way. And then the third way opens up to relieve pressure back into the machine or back into the drip tray. That prevents water from dripping out so much, so it stops the flow very quickly and gives you a drier puck at the end. All right, well, we've ended up with 18 grams. That's fine, and I didn't pay any attention to the time, so that's a flaw. So I don't remember what it was set at, what we got it at, but that's okay. This is just our first pour test. All right, so we've got our cup. We would measure it now, and we're at 18 grams, so a little rich, a little, I don't know if you'd call it under extracted, but a short amount that we got at the end. Okay, so then you would open up your portafilter, and sometimes the puck sticks in there. Okay, so there's our puck. Now, you would use a knock box to empty this out. So here it is. It's going to be doing a little dripping, but let's get our knock box. This is another 3D printed part, and you basically just hit it, knock it in, and you can see that knocks the puck out, and the puck is in there. Okay, and then we would clean this out a bit. And then we would clean this out a bit and clean the top of the shower screen out a bit. Espresso can be kind of messy. Okay, so now we're finished with our machine here. we've got our espresso, and this is the espresso you would just drink, not much crema. That's the creamy stuff on top. So I'm not sure how you would judge this as espresso, but I'm not going to be drinking it as espresso because that's too strong for me. What I'm going to do is make a Brevicano, which is my name for it. So I put my espresso on here. Let's get a close up. We're going to reset. Why is our weight gone wrong? Okay, I must have reset it. Doesn't matter. I'm going to reset this to 0. Now, normally I wouldn't want to reset it to 0. I'd want to know that I had 18 grams in there, which is what I had. I know that a tablespoon of half and half is about 20 grams. So I want a half a tablespoon. So I'm going to go about 10 grams of half and half. About, doesn't matter so much. So there's my half and half. And now I'm going to fill up with hot water, which we're going to do under this. Let's see, like something like this. So we just put it under the steam wand, but we're not going to use the steam function. We're going to use the water. Now, normally if I was doing this, I would do it on a scale. Let's see if I can do this. It's a little tight here. I didn't really want that to happen. Don't really want this steam head to get coffee in it. All right, so we're going to just do this by eye. But if I was doing it at the normal location, I would add water while it's on the scale, and I would add till I get about 80 grams total, which you remember an Americano or a long black technically is coffee with water. So now I'm just going to add some water to this. See, it's going to be hard for me to get it out of here. Okay, so there's our water added to it. Americano is hot water with the espresso added on top, and then a long black is the same thing, but for really snooty people who think there's a difference whether you put the espresso on top of the hot water or vice versa. I guess there's a difference in terms of the crema. So let's just measure what we've got here. So 63 grams total. That's not as diluted as I would normally like it, but it's good enough for this live stream. So there we go. We've now made our Brevicano. It's espresso, Papua New Guinea beans, a single shot with a half tablespoon of half and half, and then water added up to 60 grams, did we say? So 10 grams of coffee, 60 grams final weight of the drink. So 1:6 ratio in terms of grams of coffee to final liquid. And now we will taste it. No sugar. Yeah, that's amazing. The half and half is kind of makes your brain think you've got sugar. It's not sweet, but it's so rich. Yeah, that's delicious. So the fact, once I put the half and half in it, all of the bets are off in terms of tasting anything subtle. But I don't believe those people who are tasting things, tasting the difference direction that you move the spoon or that kind of stuff. Zachary Brown asked if I've ever tried condensed milk. Not in coffee, I haven't. I may have had it in tea once, but I'm not sure. But no, I don't think so. But I personally believe that the cup makes a difference in how you experience it. And there's no doubt that the beans are different. Different beans taste completely different. And the Papua New Guinea beans, for me, are clearly better than all of the other beans we've tasted, except for a couple rare ones. So this tiny little cup will get finished quickly, and then you can go back to the coffee machine and get your next dopamine drug-filled rush from making another coffee. That's why I like making them smaller. So I was thinking of like intermissions. If for an 8-hour live stream of playing games, like during an intermission in the middle, I'd get my coffee stuff, set it out, and have a little coffee making, 3 a.m. coffee making for intermission. But it's not so easy because all of this stuff lives in the kitchen. It's a big hassle to bring out and plug it in. And it's messy. Zachary Brown says, are there really people claiming the clockwise, counterclockwise direction of the spoon makes a difference? Okay, that's a tiny exaggeration. But there are absolutely people who have tested James Hoffman. James Hoffman is like the coffee expert on YouTube. Okay, so I don't believe he's not gone so far to say clockwise, counterclockwise, but I think he's done tests where he's like, if you stir or you swish back and forth, and they absolutely have done tests that feel like it's almost the same. It's almost that caliber. Like I'm trying to think of differences. If you watch like AeroPress, they have competitions for this AeroPress coffee maker, and they'll do things like they'll taste the difference between whether you like dip the filter in a drop of water first. It feels like it's all full of superstitions that they think make it taste better. I think the winner has to be the burr type. I just do not believe it. I'm sorry. I don't believe when you're grinding it this fine that you can taste the difference between different burr types on your $2,000 grinder. The other thing is, like, you go watch this guy Hoon's Coffee, right? It's like addictive to watch this guy do it, but he's making his coffee, he does these live streams. So, you know, the way they make, when they sell coffee, there's a whole world of coffee. I mean, obviously there are people who can taste some very subtle stuff. But sometimes when you buy coffee, it'll say tasting notes. It's very similar to tasting notes in wine, which has the same problem of the experts thinking they can taste things that when you really put them to blind tests, they can't. So you'll watch this guy Hoon, he'll get his coffee, and the coffee will say tasting notes of plum, honeydew melon, grapefruit, and cotton candy. And he'll pick up his cup and he'll go, yep, there's the grapefruit. There's the plum, I taste it. There's the honeydew melon. Yeah, really strong honeydew melon. And cotton candy, it's the texture of cotton candy. And occasionally, like, first of all, you want your coffee to taste like grapefruit? It's kind of ridiculous. But occasionally, like, he'll misread the bag and it'd be like, yeah, I can taste plum, grapefruit, honeydew, and then he's like, yeah. And then he'll look at the bag and the bag will say, like, taste of smoke and avocado. And he's like, oh yeah, I meant smoke and avocado is what I tasted. It's not, you have to, I'm not saying that he's not tasting those notes. And I'm not saying that having the tasting notes on the bag are completely don't have an effect. I think they do have an effect. I think it's a full placebo effect. Same thing with wine. If you put that as a tasting note of plum and you're like a suggestible person, or you just willingly buy in, you volunteer yourself, you volunteer your mind to experience an illusion, an olfactory and I forget what the word is for taste, illusion. You're paying your ticket. You're saying, here's my $30 for my super fancy beans, and I'm paying the ticket to go to Disney World to be told what to imagine the tasting notes are, and I'm gonna, like I'm hypnotized, walk right in. And if you walk right in, you'll taste those notes, and it can be fun. Do I really believe it? Do I really believe that blind tasted, if you put a blind taste test, you could taste the difference between these three and identify the notes? Not a chance in hell. But do I believe that your mind might tell you you're tasting them if you think you are? Yes. So for me, I don't care about that tasting notes, but I'm fully buying into the illusion that when I use this little WDT tool to shuffle up the needles, that I'm having an effect. And I'm fully buying in that the more time I spend making each cup, the more I'm going to appreciate that coffee. Just like when you make a piece of furniture, it's not rational to spend double the cost and 50 hours to make a chair that if you buy at the thrift store for $5 is a better chair in every way. But somehow the work you put into it sort of pays you back in some sort of emotional spirit. Zachary Brown says, I've got professional wine tasters in my family. If you come to press, I'll ask them to do a blind taste for you. There are some great papers on blind wine tasting and tasting of experts. And basically what they find is it's all a scam. That like the best wine tasters in the world, when they're blind, can't taste the difference between white wine and red wine. And if you tell someone they're drinking a $500 bottle of wine, it will taste amazing. And if you tell someone they're drinking a $2 bottle of cheap wine with a screw-on cap, it'll taste terrible. That's the power of the mind. The trick in life is to leverage that for your advantage, which is why you should go buy one 200 bottle of whiskey and keep that bottle for the rest of your life. And when you run out of whiskey, buy the cheap whiskey and pour it into that expensive bottle. And when you go out when you bring it down from the shelf, tell yourself, this is the $500 bottle, $200 bottle of whiskey that's amazing. And it'll taste amazing. And that's why I have my father's bottles of liquor up on the thing. And they have not only the value of being 30 years old and having all the emotional weight of my father who's passed on, having that, it makes it taste better. And these Papua New Guinea beans are in a jar from my father's house that my father used for tobacco. And getting the beans out of that jar makes them taste better. It's an illusion, but it works. So yeah, that's why you got to come up with stories. That's why when they pour you the wine, they tell you the story of where the wine came from, what valley, how old the daughter was that picked the grapes. She's probably 18 years old, just coming into her adulthood. Whatever story you come up with, or the mother who picked the grapes was a Holocaust survivor. Whatever you need to do, whatever story you can bring in to add some valence to the experience. So yeah, get yourself a fancy cup. Better yet, make your own cup. What else do we need to talk about with coffee? So what went wrong in this first live stream test of making coffee? It was hard to get the cup under this because of where it is. Normally it's at the same level as the surface. I didn't do the timer right. There's stuff that could be improved. But what was this, a 35-hour intermission? Well, you wouldn't do it all. You wouldn't have 35-minute intermission on every live stream, but it's too bad it's so much work to bring this in. But the camera views kind of worked well with the top down when it was being weighed out. Zachary says, how does Noki's technique differ from mine? Noki is my wife. She tends to follow my lead on these things, so she tries to copy me, but she uses a double basket the whole time. And in fact, she's more rigorous about doing it the proper way in terms of she never uses the pressurized baskets, and she drinks it straight up with water, no cream, no half and half. So she does dilute it into an Americano, but she drinks the espresso straight up. So she can probably taste a little better the different flavors than I can. She's got a little bit better palate than I do about these things. But she does agree that the Papua New Guinea beans are the best. I think she agrees with me basically about the placebo effect stuff. Although she does not, she's not a sucker like I am. Like, I'm watching this guy Hoon's coffee channel every day, laughing at it, but I'm still watching it. Whereas I do a lot of cringe watching and hate watching. And when I try to introduce Noki to this idea, she's like, this person is stupid. Turn off the channel. Like, once she concludes that this person is doing stupid things, she doesn't want to watch it. Rebecca says, you know you're exaggerating about wine. You were there for our blind taste test. Well, $2 wine is noticeable. It stops being noticeable about $30. I think that's probably right. I was exaggerating a bit, but fairly quickly it becomes unnoticeable. $2 bottle of wine, probably you could taste. There's probably something, there's a parasitic problem with the vineyard for a $2 bottle of wine. There's I think it's on Netflix, a cool documentary about a wine scammer that's quite good, that was selling super expensive bottles of wine, and I won't spoil the ending for you, but it's worth watching. One of the really interesting things about the espresso beans and dialing in, there's absolutely some truth to the dialing in. And what's kind of fascinating is that, so for each given bean, you have to find the right grind setting that creates the right pressure when you pass through and doesn't over extract or under extract. But then as the beans age, they dry out and you may have to adjust the grind settings. And there's a whole thing with carbon dioxide in the beans. That's what gives you, I believe, the crema. And so ideally you want the beans to be very fresh roasted, but not too. You want them to sit for a week or two to let some of the carbon dioxide get out of the beans. So if you notice, when you buy a bag of whole beans, there's a little one-way valve in there to let the carbon dioxide get out as the beans sit. So you want to sort of get fresh beans, but not the day after they're roasted. Zachary Brown says, also, there's probably a difference between a blind taste test by an expert versus by someone who hasn't been trained. You would hope so. I'm not 100% convinced. Don't get me wrong. It's not that I don't believe there are people who are super tasters who can taste subtle differences much better than I can. But go check out some of the papers on testing the wine experts and how well they do at tasting the difference between great, expensive, and mediocre wine. It's pretty shocking. Probably like the sommeliers, the professional people who are pairing wine and have been trained, probably be more accurate to think of those people not as wine experts, but as what's the word for the hackers that are good at social manipulation? There's a special word for it. The way they break into computer systems is they're smooth talkers, and they convince the security that they're who they say they are, that they're the IT head and they should give them the thing. That's what the sommeliers really are. They're people who hack into the social psychology of the people they're talking to and are able to confidently convince them that this wine from this valley is the perfect wine to go with this thing, and they're going to taste this specific social engineering. That's right. So the sommeliers are really social engineers, is what I think. But it works. Yep, you could do it on yourself. It works on yourself. All of this works. If you're the kind of person that likes gadgets, it works. Anything else we should talk about before we end this coffee live stream. Rebecca says we had $8, $35, $118 bottles, and seven amateurs could taste the difference and guess correctly, but it was questionable, and they weren't sure if they got the 35 and 118 correct until they were told. Zachary says, I'm going to test this out at the next family gathering. Yeah, well, I think it's worth doing more of these kinds of testing. During that wine tasting, I can't remember. I take Rebecca's memory that everyone got it right between some of the ranges. I don't remember how confident anyone was. My feeling is that everyone was like right on the line. So yeah, okay, in those cases, you could taste the difference, but you could be swayed over. You could easily be convinced, oh, I got these reversed. It's not like you could clearly taste the difference. But I take your point. At certain ranges, and the papers talk about this as well. The papers say, you know, below a certain price, you can taste the difference. So I'm not disagreeing with the idea of it. And just like my thing of the white and red is sort of an exaggeration, my memory of the papers is that some of the experts occasionally mistook white for red on the blind taste testing, etc. It's not like none of them, or even the majority, couldn't tell the difference. It's just that's how crazy it is when it's blind tasting, how hard it is to do. I'll tell you the taste test I'd like to see. I mean, the blind taste testing is the most scientific. That's the one that makes sense. But I would like to try the other side of that coin. Sit a group of people down, pour them the glass of the $20 bottle of wine, and tell them this is the $500 rare bottle of wine that was from 1987, this amazing year, and then give them the $500 bottle of wine and tell them this is just, and put that in a screw cap and say this is the cheap $10 bottle of wine. I'd like to see how many people were swayed by the story to think that that one tastes clearly better than another. There you go. So Rebecca's giving another example of like we couldn't taste the difference between Coke and Pepsi. Even friends who were sure they'd be able to tell, who know the difference. It's true. You don't realize how much your biases of what you're tasting confirm and make you think you can tell the difference. And once you get rid of that, you can convince yourself of almost anything. That's right. I remember that when we couldn't taste the difference between Pepsi and Coke. That was kind of shocking. Zachary Brown says, I feel sure I could tell the difference between Coke and Pepsi. It wasn't that we couldn't tell the difference. It wasn't that we couldn't tell the difference. It's that we couldn't say which was which. And the whole reasoning was backwards, too. We were like, oh, we know that Pepsi's sweeter, so this must be or vice versa. So we could taste the difference. We just couldn't bring up in our memory a way to compare and say which was which. Now that's odd. There's a case where I do think that the super tasters would be able to tell the difference. Zachary and I did a dark chocolate tasting once and compared, 50% to 70% to 80% cacao, 30, 50, 70, 80, and Zachary got that right. So tasting sugar levels is probably substantially more reliable, repeatable, reproducible. Zachary says, I wonder how much this theory would apply to furniture and clothing products. I'm not sure what theory we're talking about, but the whole foundation of fashion is not based on objective criteria. It's a completely cultural phenomena. If the culture tells you that something is a beautiful piece of fashion, you're inclined to believe it is. And if they tell you it's unwearable, uncouth, then you look at it and think it's horrible. Although Zachary has a long history of breaking norms of fashion. Zach says, maybe if we tell people one of Jesse's cabinets is actually a 10,000 work of art, someone would buy them at that price. Well, yeah, if you come up with a whole story. When we sold my best friend in high school, Rob Burton, we sold his couch on 70th Street and Broadway. And the way we sold it is we told people that Walter Matthau had slept on it once. But it's a win-win solution. The person who buys that couch, who thinks Walter Matthau slept on it, is going to enjoy that couch more. They have a story now. As long as it doesn't get solved, it's a willing illusion. You're going into Disney World and being told a story that that makes your life more enjoyable. Well, Walter Matthau, this was New York City in 1987. It's a believable story. If you're a con man, all the con men have to very carefully gauge. You want to make it believable enough, right? Like you don't want to say Brad Pitt and Leonardo DiCaprio both hung out on this couch and lost their virginity on it. You gotta have a story that's odd enough that it's believable. I don't remember. We probably just saw some movie recently with Walter Matthau. Remember Bad News Bears? That was a different time, that movie. Tatum O'Neal. I think it's Tatum O'Neal and Walter Matthau. I mean, that's a great movie. But that's a different time. That's the 70s. Different set of rules. Walter Matthau is great. He's in a bunch of great movies. He was in the play and then the movie The Odd Couple. He was in Taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3, a great movie. What else was Walter Matthau in? He must have been in some TV shows that I'm not remembering. Walter Matthau was great. Bad News Bears, of course, I already mentioned. One of the best movies ever. I mean, that's a classic. Well, there's a whole series of Bad News Bears, like 1, 2, 3. But the original Bad News Bears is like an absolute amazing movie in terms of being it's almost like an anti-hero. It's a very subversive movie. You could imagine all these movies, all these years about the underdog team that pushes its way through grit and determination to, win the championship and whatever. And Bad News Bears was like one of the canonical movies of the ragtag underdogs who aren't just underdogs but are misfits. And that movie plays around in some very interesting ways with that, and it's pretty amazing. Walter Matthau in Hopscotch. Hopscotch was a good movie. Hopscotch is Jane Fonda also, I believe. Is that right? Am I thinking right about Hopscotch? A little bit of a mystery movie with Jane Fonda, I believe. As a little tangent, how about, this is not Walter Matthau, but Slapstick with Paul Newman and the ragtag bunch of hockey players. That's another Slapshot and Bad News Bears are amazing sort of alt sports movies, alt sports comedies type thing, and pretty amazing movies. The real question is, should I put this video on the channel? How many unsubscribers will I get if I put this on the channel? That's the guess. That's the competition here. When I put my how to film video, which took me like 3 months and took me so much time to film, when I put that series of videos on the channel, the subscribers went, they just dropped off a cliff, like 10 people unsubscribed instantly. And I wonder how many would unsubscribe if I upload this video. I really do. I feel like the charm of these videos, though, is if you do them live. Zachary's put his guess in. 12 unsubscribers. I think if I did it, I should do it live. This was sort of a test stream. It's just too complicated to set up. All right, looks like we might have lost Rebecca. Zachary, thank you for testing this out with me. Negative 12 unsubscribers, I see. So that means you think 12 new subscribers? I think the nature of the YouTube algorithm is when you do something different, it's unsubscribe is the result. Because almost by definition, the people who will get notified about it are not going to be people who want it. All right, so signing off. Maybe we'll do this again for real during one of the live streams of gameplay. Maybe not, but thanks for joining me. We'll see you next time. Next game is going to be on Wednesday, I think. All right, see ya.